And up first, we'll have Kim Schaefer, our city recorder, do the roll call.
Josh Port, absent. Kim Ulfers.
Here.
Lance Caddy.
Here.
Tom Wells.
And up first, we'll have Kim Schaefer, our city recorder, do.
Virginia Cloyd.
Here.
Bob Elliott.
Here.
Catherine Lacey. Absent. Mayor Aziz.
Here.
Councillor Furlow.
Here.
Councillor Grizzle.
Here.
Councillor Bolin.
Here.
Councillor Rees-Camp. Absent. Councillor Stouter. Here. Councillor Steinhabel.
Here.
Thank you. And Kim, I did forget to mention, I spoke to Councilor Rees-Camp, and he is not going to be able to make it to this meeting, possibly even our next meeting. So I'll keep you apprised of that. I apologize, I didn't get that to you today.
Thank you.
Okay, first up, we have nominations for the Budget Committee Chair. And because of the kind of weird circumstances of doing this electronically for the first time ever, I asked KJ Ulfers, who's done this in the past for us and done a great job, if he would do it, and he has agreed. So seeing any no dissension amongst everybody, we'll go ahead and just have KJ be our Budget Committee Chair. I don't know if we have to officially vote on that, Matt. Do you know?
You should. Yeah.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah,
Okay.
we normally do. I'll nominate KJ.
Second.
Okay.
I'll second it.
It's been nominated, and it's been it has
Moved and
I've-
seconded.
moved and seconded. Thank you. Lost my mind for a second. To nominate KJ Elfers as the Budget Committee Chair. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you, KJ. And we also need a Budget Committee Secretary. The committee chair will do that, and the actual minutes will be prepared by the City Recorder's Office.
Okay, any nominations for the secretary position?
I nominate Michelle.
Go ahead.
I second Michelle.
Well,
Thanks,
you-
guys.
Saved you, Rebecca.
Nominate Rebecca Grizzle.
We always make it be a woman. I hate that.
Okay, we've had a motion and a second. All those in favor of Michelle being the secretary, say aye.
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 Opposed? Go ahead, Michelle, you can say it.
Me? No, I'm good.
Okay, we've got that nominations taken care of. Approval of the fiscal year 2019-2020 budget meeting minutes, excuse me. We need does anybody have any questions about the last budget meetings? If not, we will need to have a motion to accept those and pass them in a second.
Move for approval.
Okay?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, moving right along. Now we have the presentation of the FY 2021 budget message. That will be Ron and Matt. And we'll go forward with that. Ron?
Okay, thank you, Budget Committee, members of the council. Obviously, this is kind of an odd time, a little bit hard to do this, and we're going to make the best of it. So with that, we're proposing to simplify the presentation this year, basically due to the meeting format. Not going to try and go through a bunch of PowerPoints and stuff like that. We have all the directors on the line. So they're here to ask the questions, but Matt and I will be presenting all the budgets. And then, of course, if you've got questions about individual budgets, please feel free to ask during that time. but in order to keep things somewhat simplified and limited amount of interaction on the meeting, because it is hard to hear sometimes, we're proposing to do it that way. With that, the overview of the budget is contained in the budget message. I'm actually going to read the budget message into the record. It's something that we should have been doing all along, and so I will read that into the record, and then we will go from there. So, Matt, what page?
That's A,
Okay.
budget document.
Okay. So we, the management team of the City of Lebanon, respectfully submit the following budget for fiscal year July 1, 2020 to June 30, 2021. This year, we're faced with a unique and difficult challenge with the ongoing COVID-19 epidemic. There is significant uncertainty with revenue, even with significant uncertainty and challenge of matching expenses with forecasted revenues in several funds. All funds are balanced. Some of the significant highlights for this year: overall, there is a 1 FTE decrease in city staffing compared to the fiscal year 2019-20 budget. The overall city budget is 6.37% more this year than it was last year. This is mainly due to the increase in scope of the West Side Interceptor project. The general fund is down $2.561 million, or 16.4%. This year in relation to allocating personnel across funds instead of large transfers for personnel costs. Citywide contingencies are down 14.01%, or $640,687, from $4,572,429 to $3,931,742. With that, the general fund contingency is down 0.61%, and you can see the numbers there, meeting and exceeding with a targeted goal of 19%. We will begin the next phase of the West Side Interceptor project this year. That's roughly a $20 million project. The Northwest Urban Renewal District, it will be underfunded in addition to what has been in the past several years, for a total of approximately $1.6 million. This will allow these property taxes to be distributed to the other taxing districts in the area. With that, the overview. The City of Lebanon's budget is $63,307,859, and when combined with the Urban Renewal District, Urban Renewal Agency, the budget totals $69,194,044. Table shown. The table below shows the overall changes in the budget from the prior year. I'm not going to go through that, but you can see in the table itself, as part of the message on page B, what those changes are. The interfund transfers being the largest of that, and it's all in how we are allocating staff this year, rather than massive amounts of transfers. Should be noted that while appropriations for the city urban renewals total $69,194,000, this total includes interfund transfers, which represent monies that are essentially counted twice, once when initially received and again when received by the fund benefiting from the transfer. Subtracting the interfund transfers of $6,332,402 from a total appropriations results in the effective total budgets for fiscal year 2021 of $62,861,642. The city's amount is $6,765,150 more in personnel costs, more than 2019-20, and represents a 12.06% increase. The increase can be broken down as follows: $45,979 increase in personnel costs, $142,050 increase in materials and service, $7 million increase in capital outlay, and roughly $338,000 increase in contingency, and $598,000 increase in debt service. As prior years, we have provided separate summary of interfund transfers. This will hopefully allow the Budget Committee a comprehensive view of the fund transfers as well as assurances that they are balanced. This year, the general fund is increasing by $1,631,752. The following reasons are listed as to why that's happening. We're
Ron.
estimating, go ahead.
Can you hold on a second? If you have the ability to mute your phone or your computer, there's one that's out there that we can hear some noises and stuff, and it's hard to hear Ron. So if you could mute your phone or your computer, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. So back to why the increase. So estimated property tax is forecast to be greater than the prior year due to the underfunding of the Northwest Urban Renewal District. That also represents our conservative view of what property tax collection is going to be. We normally would estimate 94% collection. This year, we're estimating 90% collection. The planned contingency is per financial policies at 19%. Transfers out of the general fund include a large transfer of the Parks Enterprise Fund, as well as moving all the park activity into that fund rather than into that it's been in the general fund. There's another large transfer of the Northwest Urban Renewal District to pay projects out of that fund as well. City is working with the Teamster Union to extend our current contract for 1 year with a 2% cost of living. No COLA is proposed for the exempt or part-time employees, and the AFSCME union will receive an increase of $1 per hour as negotiated in their contract. With that, I'm not going to go into the urban renewal districts. We'll get into that a little bit later, but you can see as part of the presentation, we have included this into the budget message. We will discuss the urban renewal agency funds as we get further on down the road as part of that. And we've also listed different things out of our community strategic action plan on page D, and I won't read through all those as well, but those are the items that are accomplished during the past 4 fiscal years. So if there's any questions about those. With that, we extend our sincere thanks to the Budget Committee members for serving on our committee, being part of this vital committee. We earnestly solicit your input and strive to create a budget that is fiscally responsible while also meeting the council goals and the community needs. The budget is not only a spending plan, but a policy statement as such. It outlines the priorities of the city and the council. It outlines activities, service levels, and projects for the coming fiscal year and beyond. Thoughtful participation in the budgeting process helps assure budget that the best reflects the values of the community. This budget is presented to the City Council, Budget Committee, and community for their review and consideration for the city's operations, service projects, programs in fiscal year 2021. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Now, next on the agenda, and I'm not sure how we're supposed to do this, is public comments.
So Kim, the public comments were to come to me in writing before the meeting, and I received no public comments.
Okay, then, we will take care of that. So next, we're going to have the presentation of the department budgets. As Ron said, this is going to be different than we've had in the last couple of years, as they are going to just go ahead and go through this as opposed to calling up each individual department head. So make sure if you have any questions, you let them know, because the department heads are available to answer any specific questions. Ron, back over to you.
Okay, with that, I'm going to kind of give it to Matt for an overview of this and let him go through a few things.
Okay, so I just want to, bring to everyone's attention the beginning part of the budget starting on page 1. It goes through a summary view of the budget in general. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, maybe go back and look at it and see if there's any questions that you have. You can see we have various graphs and stuff to try and help bring out some of the detail. Page numbers starting on page 1 through, I believe it goes to page, let's see, 21. And then on page 22, we get into the general fund. But I wanted to kind of go over some things that we've been facing and that kind of what we've done at this point. So we have budgeted our revenues conservatively. We do this every year. We did this more so this year. We've had some concern over what type of property tax we will get in the next year. Some of my personal concern has been with the federal government coming out and telling people you can go up to a year without paying your mortgage. To me, brings some concern of what type of property tax revenue we will receive. At this point, we have decided to go with 90% collection rate. This is kind of what we saw back in 2008 through 11 during the Great Recession. We didn't really have anything else to compare this with, so that's what we've started with. In addition to that, transient lodging tax revenues have decreased. I'm sure many of you are aware we've had hotels that have even closed during this time. A lot of revenue is also based on conferences and stuff that are had in the city. We're not sure when or if those will come back to where they were before the pandemic. So we've budgeted a 70% decrease in our transient lodging tax revenue. Another one is gas tax revenue. This is all based on how much people drive. During the pandemic, people stayed home. People learned to telecommute. We have some feeling that there's going to be a continued desire by people to telecommute, at least part-time, which will likely affect this revenue stream for years to come. Some of the other lesser amounts of revenue that have been affected are our parks reservation revenue and our room rental revenue from the library and senior center. These are all places where we are seeing that there's going to be some decreases. In addition to that, there are franchise fees that we don't really know what's going to happen. At this point, I can tell you from our utility revenue, we haven't seen a large decrease in payments. So at this point, we feel like we're going to see a continued revenue stream from our franchise fees. It could be that, you know, at this point, people have had the federal stimulus to pay some of their bills. Could that dry up? It's possible. So these are all things that we'll continue to look at as we go forward through the year. But at this point, there's not a lot that we can know to change our budget. In addition to that, as we get into expenses, we've asked the directors to do their best to budget the essentials. We've asked them to hold off on any large purchases until January if possible. That should allow us to see what our property tax revenue looks like when it comes in November and December. That's when we receive, you know, 75% of our property tax revenue.
Matt,
So we're hoping, yes.
I'm sorry does that include didn't we just approve like a really large truck for the maintenance department? Ron?
Yeah, I believe that allowed us to get the truck ordered.
That's
Yeah,
already passed.
Right, and that's out of the utilities as well.
Okay, sorry.
So let's see. So then going into the personnel line items. So we've really adjusted how we did this year. As Ron was talking about, we have eliminated about $2 million in transfers into the general fund for personnel services. Previously, people were budgeted in one fund, and then the other funds that they do work out of would transfer money to the general fund. What happened is if a position went vacant for some period of time, the transfers continued to happen and the general fund benefited from those transfers. It's a lot easier from a recording standpoint to allocate a person into different funds. And then if that position is vacant, there's just no costs that go into the funds for that. As Ron said, we did remove one position from the budget. That was mainly because the position was vacant, and that was the communication coordinator and administrative assistant. In years going forward, if that needs to be brought back, it's doable, but it kind of seemed like the right move at the time with everything that's going on. the duties of that position have been distributed among various departments to fulfill during this time as well. One of the large expenditures that we're going to have coming out of the general fund and the equipment acquisition and replacement fund and the water fund is the repayment to the Northwest Urban Renewal District. We're looking at about $1.1 million that's going back to the Urban Renewal District. And we've had the conversation in a work session of why we're doing that, but we overspent money on projects out of that fund than we should have. So now we have to put some money back into it. And then kind of the final of the summary part that I'm going to go through is we have decided to eliminate some departments and some funds within the budget. I know I had hoped we probably did more than what we've done this year. But the Public Works Department was really just a place that personnel was sitting in. So as we allocated those personnel across the funds that they're doing work in, we decided it would be best to just remove that department, as I think we had $5,000 in materials and service costs that we just were able to shift into a different fund. As well, in talking with Jason Williams, we decided to kind of pool all the parks into one fund. It allows us to kind of have a more flexibility to address the needs that are there, and it allows us to know exactly how much we have and how much we can spend. When it was split across in 3 different places, it was a little bit more difficult to make sure we kept track of that. Outside of that, the Parks Grant Fund is closing. It should, by the end of this year, run out of any funds, and it'll just close as we didn't budget anything for next year in it. This will also be the last year of the State Highway Signal Maintenance Fund. They had given us some money, and we've used that money up, and in the future, if we get additional money, we will put it into a different fund that we can keep track of in a different way. Another one is the Infrastructure Deferral Fund. We've decided to combine with the Streets Capital Fund. We're able within that fund to just kind of earmark, hey, this amount is for this future project. And so without having an additional fund just to go through the paperwork, we've made that adjustment. There are 4 other funds that we've closed that'll all go back to the general fund. That's the Bail Fund, the Youth Court Fund, the Police Reserves Fund, and the Equitable Sharing Fund. Most of these have very small revenue and expenses that could be handled just through a normal department budget. We're not seeing a large amount of revenue come in that's specifically for these things. And so we're able to just pay for it as we kind of get the money. The Bail Fund, I honestly don't know why it was set up the way it was, but based on what I can tell is it never was really a trust fund, because it just kind of covered what the costs could be covered, and then the rest of the costs hit the general fund anyways. So to me, it made more sense to just combine that into the municipal court department, and we'll keep track of the actual liability that we have in bail. So if we need to repay someone, we can do that. But most of those costs are forfeited back to the city and are just used to cover some of our costs. So that covers the quick overview. The next thing that I wanted to get into is not as easy to talk about. It's been something that I know Ron has dealt with some utility funds a number of years back, and we're seeing it more so in the general fund now. The way that we kind of refer to it is it's a budgeted structural deficit. Over the past 4 years, we've had since the fiscal year 16 budget, we've had a structural deficit ranging from 500 and I guess the low was about 500,000 and the high was about 800,000. To give you an idea of what I mean by structural deficit, I tried to make some type of simple explanation for this. So if you have, say, a budget and your revenue is $100, and say part of that $100 is $20 in savings. And then the remaining $80 is new revenue that you got that year. And then you look at your expenses and you have $85 in operating expenses, and then you have $15 in contingency. That way your budget is equal at $100 for both your revenue and your expenses. But if your operating revenues are more than your new, did I say revenues?
Yes.
If your operating expenses of $85 are more than your new revenue of $80, you're going to use $5 of your savings. The next year you won't have that savings to start out the next year to have that $100 in revenue. You'll be down to $95 if your new revenue doesn't increase, and likely your expenses are not going to decrease with that as well. So you'd still have at least $85 in expenses and $15 in contingency. So then you'd have a $5 deficit in what you have the budget. So that's very small scale. When we look at it on the city's budget, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I want to point out that this is just a budgeted deficit. Over those same 4 years, there hasn't been a year that we ended up with a deficit. We had positive amounts in each of those years, and a lot of that comes from our desire to conservatively budget our revenues and then not as conservatively budget our expenses. So we under budget our revenues, we over budget our expenses. We've ended up being good at this point. What happens is you come to a year like this where your revenues are going to be short and maybe your expenses aren't going to be short, and you start to see that deficit actually hit home. Over the past year, I know I've tried to whittle this down, and if we budgeted our revenues the way that we normally do, that structural deficit would have gone down to $400,000, which would have been less than any year that we have seen back to 2016. So I just want to make sure that you as the budget committee are aware of that aspect of it. We're going to continue to work on this to kind of bring that in line so that the new revenue is in line with our operating expenses. In years where you don't spend everything, that money can be carried over to the next year. We can use that for capital projects. We can use that for additional savings for the future in whatever ways we need to. But it gives us that flexibility to make sure that we're staying fiscally responsible and fiscally solvent going forward. So,
Does anybody have any questions about that? I mean, it's a little bit complex, and that's
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was just curious, how does that reconcile then at the end? How do we balance that, or how do we reconcile that difference?
Well, it will reconcile. So really, I mean, in a nutshell, what you're doing is you're taking money that you didn't spend from the previous fiscal year, and you're moving that forward to this fiscal, your next fiscal year, in order to meet your operating budget. So that's where the conservative revenue collection versus the not so conservative expenditure comes in. So really what we're getting at is we need to, which Matt has been working on, we need to, the general fund especially needs to be more in line with your expenditures need to match your new revenue, or at least fairly close. It's a rarity that we would spend all of our, what we have budgeted for an expense in any given year. But in a year like this, where if our property tax collection, just for an example, was to be substantially lower than what we've projected, but yet we've still got these costs because there are no real big capital costs in it, you could really see a dent for contingency at the end. So that's the goal. we just want to make sure everybody's aware of that we're trying to push for that goal, to get those two to equal out. And then that way, what you have left over from the previous year, like Matt said, it can go into capital projects. It could go towards a new city hall project, a park project, well, you know, you name it. That's up to the budget committee to decide that. But that's the end goal. We just want to make sure that it's out there.
Okay, thanks.
No other questions, I'll move forward. So I'm gonna move on to page, probably jump right into the budget, presentation. The general fund revenues, so budget revenues are, for the most part, in line with last year, with the exception of our beginning balance. There are certain areas where we're looking at an increase. When you look at the fines and forfeitures, that's mainly due to the bail fund being moved into the general fund. Outside of that, there is very limited amounts of change. The school district landscaping money went to the parks fund. And as you can see, the amount that we started the year at was 4 million. Switch pages. Yeah. So I'm on page 31 now. The beginning balance that we ended up with last year was 4 million. We originally had budgeted that it'd be about 3.5. So that's kind of where you can see how some of those revenues or expenses come in lower than when we do the budget. You come up with your best estimate for what the end of year numbers are going to be, but you inevitably have differences. So we're projecting that the beginning balance will be decreased by almost $1 million from last year to this year. Moving into the administration department on page 34 and 35. The biggest changes here is one, the personnel allocation that definitely brought down the personnel service amount. In addition to that, we have reduced the community outreach by about $10,000. The contract services decreased by $16,000, which was specific to a Christmas decorations grant that we had received. We decreased the special projects by over $10,000. And then the meeting and conferences, we decreased by $4,100, and the art commission by $3,500.
Matt,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt again. Do you have, since we're sharing your screen, do you have a way to maybe move your pointer when you're going to different numbers? Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I will do
just
my
like
best.
that, if you can, just when you're looking at something, so I can look at. I'm
So
looking at
community outreach decreased, the contract services decreased, the department operating expenses decreased, meetings and conferences decreased, and then down here at the bottom, art commission. Are there any questions on that?
Increase your zoom on PDF a little bit. Maximize that. There you go.
Well, maybe not that much.
No, not that.
Okay. Now we're going to move to human resources. There hasn't really been any changes in human resources. The overall materials and services budget is the same. You can notice this year we had some additional costs because we had an additional recruitment and we paid Profman. So that will be a budget adjustment that we bring to council in the next meeting. Legal services, The biggest change here is the city attorney contract that the council approved at their last meeting. We've also decreased the amount for the outside attorney's fee. This originally, in years past, has been used for paying the court-appointed attorneys. We've moved that piece of it back into the court department. And then this is out there kind of as a reserve in case Trey can't represent us on something because he is working for both parties or whatever other reason we need to get an outside attorney. Moving on to the community development department. There's not a huge difference here. We've got the decrease in personnel costs because of the allocations. Outside of that, some of the economic development costs were moved out of the administration department to the community development department that are in here. One of the things that we did not include in the budget was $13,500. That was part of a RAIN contract. Per that contract, it stated that if it wasn't budgeted, we wouldn't have to pay it. This is one of the areas that COVID-19 has kind of affected our economic development. We'll talk about some others of those as we get to the Motel Tax fund, but that's kind of so far the area that we're seeing it. Okay, now we're going to page 45 is just showing what was the public works. You can see there was hardly any materials and services. It was all personnel services. Those have been allocated to the other places. Now on page 47 is the parks. You'll see that all those are zero as well because those all got moved to the Parks Enterprise Fund. We'll talk about that more there. Moving on to page 50, you've got the finance department. So I'm not going to continue to go back and touch on the personnel services. If you guys have specific questions, I'm happy to answer them. And we have in the budget document on page 226, we have the actual allocation of each employee into which departments they're in. So that will kind of give you an idea of how we did that at that point. Overall for finance, we decreased a little bit in some of our areas where we were trying to save a little bit just because of what's going on. There's not much change there. Going into the legislation department on page 53. The things that are here is we've got an increase due to going to the state records management system, and also we moved the archiving of social media from the admin department to the legislative department. In addition to that, they split off education and training between council and staff. Moving on to the library fund on page 56. Personnel service costs. The decrease from here came from the contract services. Last year we had thrown in some money for the architectural development of the additional room. So that's a big decrease. There were two increases. One is the public computer system costs about $13,600 a year to kind of operate that on an annual subscription. And then we're proposing a new public copy machine that would replace the really old coin operated one that we have. Moving into courts.
Question, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so the library issue, as well as a couple of other issues we'll run into, and you maybe plan on uncovering this, but since the library is I have a question about how this all works. Since the library is not functional, are those people still working, or are they on unemployment, or are we still paying their salaries? How does that work?
So we've got a number of employees both at the library and our transit drivers that have been furloughed. They're able to collect unemployment while they're on furlough, and they're able to keep their city benefits while they're furloughed. There are a few of the library staff that are continuing to work.
Okay, that was.
And the library is now open for drive-up service, curbside pickup.
Okay, because that also includes in the police department, the school resource officer. And I was just wondering about that as well.
They've just been moved onto patrol duty.
They have. Okay. That's, as I say, it's just, I was curious as to how that worked. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so moving into the court on page 60, we had one staff that was half-time finance, half-time municipal court. And we've decided to move that staff entirely over to the municipal court. That's why you see an increase in the FTE there. There was a corresponding decrease to finance, but it's hard to see with the allocations that we do. In addition to that, you've got a bunch of these new expenses, all relating back to the bail fund. As we brought them in here, we have certain assessments that when we get fines, we owe to the county. So it's really money comes in, money goes out. We did that before, it just all happened through the bail fund. No big changes though. Moving into the police department, we're gonna go to page 64. They did have an increase in their personnel services due to the cost of living increase, but also we moved our previous captain was Greg Burrows, who retired. His position was part-time. It got moved to a full-time position. And then we're also looking at doing some restructuring to have an additional lieutenant within our department. And so that would kind of bump one up in each place at this point. In addition to that, you'll see a large decrease in the computer support expense. We did a large CAD RMS project that we completed this past year. And so that money's going back to kind of more what it used to be. In addition to that, we have an increase in the other equipment. We need to upgrade the handhelds and the in-car radio systems. And so that's kind of what the other equipment is there. They also sent some money to the equipment acquisition and replacement fund, which is a normal expense to replace the equipment that we use on an annual basis.
I have a question. So with the radio upgrade, is that going to the 700 megahertz to be in compliance with the rest of the?
Frank?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so the goal behind, currently we're UHF, so we have to kind of look at the 700 megahertz. I don't know if we'll be able to do that. However, we want to upgrade our radio and handheld systems to be a multi-band so we can listen to VHF, UHF, and also 700 megahertz, which will allow us to communicate with other agencies.
Awesome.
Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll go to the senior center. The biggest difference in the senior center, I think right now, is that we have moved half of the director's salary from, or not half, a quarter of the director's salary from the senior center to the Lynx system. Other than that, there aren't any big effects to the budget. There are going to be some programming differences as the COVID-19 response is probably going to require that building to be closed longer than some of our other facilities. Moving on to the non-departmental on page 71. Costs here frequently fluctuate between years. Our audit expense will actually go down because we've determined with the state we only need to do 2 instead of 4. And that will just be combining all the urban renewal districts into one urban renewal agency. And then we have a big increase in the department operating expense. What we've done here is we've set aside about $50,000 to help with some training and buying some equipment for emergency management. There's another $25,000 out of both the water and the sewer funds that we'll be using to make sure that we have a good plan going forward. So when we face challenges like this COVID-19, we have the proper response and are able to kind of handle it without much issue. Some of the other large increases are due to our insurance. We've had a number of claims in the past few years that have caused our insurance to increase significantly. One of the other things that we haven't done in the past that I'm proposing that we do is kind of having a deductible line item as well. We participate in what they call the Aggregate Deductible, which is we pay the first $25,000 of claims that the city receives. In turn for that, we get a lower premium, but that $25,000 actually stays open for, I can't remember if it's 5 or 7 years. So if you have anybody that comes back and files a claim for a previous year, we could still have some liability for that deductible in a previous year. So that's why I've included that. In addition, we've increased our utilities expenses. Seems like those costs continue to climb. We don't have any capital outlay planned for the we're making a large contribution from the general fund to the parks, which is pretty much what used to be our parks department. The other transfers are pretty similar, with the exception of the equipment acquisition and replacement fund. Last year, we specifically sent this whole $567,000 to there for specific projects that we wanted to do. Unfortunately, one of those projects was City Hall, which you'll see as we get to the 820, we're proposing we use that money to repay the urban renewal district that we need to pay. And then we've got the amount from the general fund to repay the urban renewal district as well at the $350,000. Our contingencies are up slightly above the 19%. There was a small amount that was above that, and due to the uncertain circumstances, we felt it would probably be best to just kind of pad that contingency at this point. The debt service is pretty much the same. It fluctuates a little bit each year. But overall, that's the general fund. Are there any outstanding questions on the general fund?
Matt, on the debt services, or any other good opportunities out there to reduce our interest rates?
We are looking at one. Since it's in the looking stage, I haven't put anything in the budget, but there's an opportunity for us to probably refinance one of our, I think it's sewer bonds, on a 10-year loan. And we could save probably $100,000. So we're going to look into doing that.
Thank you.
Yep. If there's no additional questions, I'll
Lance needs to
move on.
Someone needs to tell Lance to turn his mic off.
So in debt service, we've got 3 debt service funds. You can see overall we've got an increase. The first one is our Geo Bond Fund. Last year we had a quite large beginning balance. We kind of didn't bring in as many property taxes because of that beginning balance. Turned out we had a slight issue in what account something got recorded in, and so currently we're going to look at having a negative balance for a short period of time until our property taxes come in. Overall, it shouldn't affect our ability to pay our bonds at all. Overall, the amount due is increased by about $50,000 for the year.
Matt, can you go back to that? Sorry, can you go back to that last thing you just said? You said that, okay, talk about the taxes coming in and start there.
Yep. So when we budgeted last year, we get a turnover from the county that has all of our city tax, all of our bond tax, all of our urban renewal taxes all on one form. We take that and we split it up and we then put it in the different funds. We figured out that we had put one of those in the wrong fund, but we didn't do that before we did the budget. And so last year's budget, you can see we thought the beginning balance was going to be $505,000, when in reality, some of what we thought was going to stay in that fund was due to a different fund. And so our beginning balance went from 505 in budgeted to about 380 in actual. So that's something that we've put in place, kind of the ability to go and look at each of these places that we receive property tax and look at our budget versus our actual and make sure that those percentages are pretty similar across each budget or each fund, since the way that we're given property taxes is allocated based on what the county collects. So it should stay pretty consistent across all of our funds. But unfortunately, I didn't catch that before we had that finalized in our budget last year. Moving on to the full faith and credit bond budget. The wastewater utility amount came out of this bond this year. It was structured so that water paid a portion, or wastewater paid a portion, and then the urban renewal paid a portion. This year, what happened is wastewater came off and the urban renewals amount increased. So the overall amount increased some, but you can see there's a large increase from the urban renewal fund. That's just based on how the bond was set up. So we've got transfers in from the water fund and from the urban renewal district to pay that debt amount. You can see the principal and interest amounts on page 80. And then moving on to the pension bond, this is page 82. We get transfers in from each fund that has personnel, and we use that to make the payment on this bond. I've looked into if we could refinance this bond because it has extremely high interest rates, but at this point it does not appear like we can refinance it. So it's part of the original provision. Then we'll move into the enterprise funds if there's no questions.
Okay, seeing no questions, start with the water utility this year. I guess we should start, first of all, by saying there is no proposed increase in fees in either water, wastewater, or storm drainage this year, just based mostly in what the situation we're in right now. So with starting with the water fund on page
87.
Page 87. So the water fund houses, 4 or 5 different departments. Basically, you've got your operations and maintenance section of it. We've got a water treatment plant section of it. And then I believe we've got our capital section of it. This year, Matt, if you'll go to 433, Fund 433 on page
91?
91. This is where operations of the water treatment plant are. You can see that we've changed a little bit. The salaries have increased, and that's mostly due to how we're budgeting. We've brought down our materials and services just a bit. We had some. We've got some data now on how the plant runs, so we're able to do that this year. And then, of course, we increased our improvements just as we're going forward for pump replacements, chemical feed replacements, and different items like that. And then I believe the debt service is attached to this one as well. Big capital projects out of the water fund. I think probably the biggest things to think about. We've budgeted for the Walker Road water line replacement. That is in conjunction with the West Side Interceptor. We're having to do that. We're actually having to rebuild that section of Walker Road from Stoltz Hill to 6th Street. That's a 40-year-old asphalt concrete water line, or asbestos cement concrete water line. Anytime you're doing that kind of excavation and work around it, it'll probably break. I'll just say it. They were just never meant to be worked on. So we've budgeted to do that. We put money into mothballing and probably demoing the 2nd Street water plant, doing some of that. 7th Street water line replacement. We'll be putting the Sherman Street water line replacement out on the street here probably in the next month or two. And then we're doing a flow kiosk. So that's kind of the water fund in a nutshell. Is there any questions about that?
Yeah, Ron?
Yes.
Yeah, Mayor Aziz, on the operating of the new water treatment plant, before when we had the company taking the reins and they were running it, what's the difference in operating costs, just in general, if you have, are we in a better situation now that we're handling it in-house?
I can't even tell you. You're talking about two different plants. So let me, I guess, to give you an idea, the old plant ran basically. You turned it on, and there was very little maintenance that was needed on it. You couldn't turn it off because if you turned it off, it took 24 hours to get back on. So it just ran. So there's very little attention that was needed to be paid to it. So now you've got this plant here that, yes, it's pretty intensive. It doesn't have to run all the time, and it's a little more efficient. So you're trying to compare apples and oranges there without actually having a price from somebody else. I don't know. You know, I can say that our guys that run the plant are doing a great job. They've managed to work out all the bugs with the startup, which has been phenomenal. You know, and it's going good that way. But it's in terms of it wouldn't be even a fair assessment if I told you, because we would need to see what they could have run this plant at, because this plant has to be manned, or you can run it remotely, obviously, but you're still paying somebody to do it regardless. Whereas the plant over there on 2nd Street, there was maybe 4 hours a day, 5 days a week spent over there, and most of that was running labs. Anytime they spent quite a time over there was during a breakdown. So.
Okay, thanks for that.
You bet. Any other questions on water? Okay, if not, we'll move to the storm drainage utility on page
96.
96. No real changes here this year. The biggest capital expense in this is the continuation of the storm drainage master plan. We're in good process of that. I hope to have a preliminary draft here probably in October or November. So we'll finish that out. But this fund houses, you know, we pay for a lot of our little maintenance repairs on our storm drainage system, basically the cleaning and TVing and a little bit of capital. It doesn't generate much. So with that, I can answer any questions on it. Okay, moving on to the wastewater, Fund 470 on page
102.
102. So again, this fund houses several different departments. You have your operations and maintenance expenses for everyday operations. You have your operations of your wastewater treatment plant, which is separated out. We have a small sewer lateral program. That was two. There's a small sewer and sewer lateral program. We also have a capital program within wastewater. Probably the biggest things to identify has changed this year. Most everything stayed relatively the same. Obviously the staffing went up, but that's due to the allocations. I think our big capital for this year, obviously, is the West Side Interceptor. We're looking really good with DEQ right now. We're waiting on just one piece from the Division of State Lands, and then we should be able to move forward with a loan, $14 million loan. We also have set money aside to do some of that with cash on our side. We've also budgeted roughly $700,000 in legal services for our ongoing lawsuit that we're in. So with that, I can answer any questions about wastewater. Okay. I think that's it on your utility funds, unless there's any questions.
Hey, Ron, could you just real briefly give the 30,000-foot overview for those folks that are on the committee that aren't apprised of the lawsuit? Just a general thing, just where that money's going to.
Yeah. It's going to be real general. So we believe that the cannibal system doesn't work. I mean, that's in a nutshell. The cannibal system was supposed to reduce solids for our wastewater plant. It was put in 2010. Since that time, we believe that it hasn't worked. Essentially, we've gotten to the point here last year, I believe it was, where we actually have filed suit against Jacobs CH Snowmail, and we are moving down that ever so slow road of litigation. So that's kind of where we're at in a nutshell right now, without getting into any details and any attorney-client privilege stuff.
Perfect. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay, now we're going to move into the special revenue funds. First of those is the motel tax. As I discussed before, we really have no idea what to expect at this point and what type of revenue that we were going to get. Currently, we budgeted 70% revenue, or a 70% decrease in revenue.
Oh, okay, I was going to say, wow.
Yeah, and so we've got 85,000 in here is what we project. The county motel tax, that's just the 3% of what the 85 is, since we collect the tax for them. We do show that we'll have a slight beginning balance to start the year. And then you've got your expenses. The contract with the chamber is being funded at 75% of what its normal is. That was agreed to by the chamber. We're hoping that revenue comes in strong enough to continue with that at that rate. We'll be rediscussing that with the chamber in September as that comes up. The department operating expenses, these are the amounts that we're collecting for the county, just turning around and sending it out to them. Since we have to budget the revenue, we have to budget the expense, it matches exactly. And then we still have this loan to Parks SDC that we're paying back out of this funding as well. You will notice one of the big things is we do not have any funding in the budget for LDA. And so you can see that there are limited opportunities how our budget currently is to kind of promote the economic development for businesses that are currently in business right now. Also, in addition, we started this downtown restoration program, and there's no funding this year to have that program go forward. we're hoping in the future that that can come back at some point when we see the revenues bounce back. Any questions? Okay. Going into the building fund, there's not a whole lot of changes in this fund. We've got staff that was put into it. You'll notice on a lot of these, if you're like, does that seem reasonable? You can take the personnel costs and then look at what was sent to the general fund for salary and benefits and see that usually they're pretty close. If they're not, we did some type of change in the allocations that we were using. But overall, this fund is what it is. Any questions on that? Moving on to page 117, the Park Enterprise Fund. You'll see this is where we brought the school district landscaping revenue into, and then we decreased slightly our fees from camping and shelters and other park fees. We'll see how those revenues come in. We'll be keeping an eye on them. There's a large transfer in from the general fund since we moved pretty much everything that was in the general fund to here. But we've got our personnel costs, and the materials and services pretty much add up to be what was here last year, what was in the general fund last year, and then also what was in the Cheetah Lake department last year as well. We decided to just kind of mash those all into one. So you can see by this blue color that going forward, we will not budget amounts specifically in this area. Any questions on that? Okay. We're going to move into GIS. So GIS has had quite an increase. We decided to move forward with an enterprise license on our GIS software. I know Ron and I have had the opportunity to kind of see what the IT and GIS department's been putting together, and it's going to be amazing, and it's going to be a really big opportunity for the public to have a better picture of what the city does and where and how our system works. It's going to help development in a lot of ways. So we've got that increase there. Outside of that, we moved personnel costs into this fund. Originally, it was a transfer from here to IT, and so I said, let's just allocate like we're doing on the others. So you can see it's a little bit higher than what the previous allocation was, but still reasonable. Any questions on that? Moving forward, IT department. I'm sure as you guys know, during this pandemic, IT has become front and center of a lot of things. Without them, we would have a really hard time running the city. It'd be pretty interesting. So in IT's budget, you're going to see a significant increase in the contract services. This is really for hiring some temp work. We weren't sure if we should throw in a new person in the budget with all that's going on, but we knew that they needed some help. And so at this point, we decided that's going to be the route to go, is we'll have the ability for them to hire temps when needed to help support the overall city function. If we get to a point where we're certain on what life's going to be going forward, we may have the opportunity to kind of move that back into personnel services and hire a person full-time. We have some decrease in the overall capital outlay, but that's because we had some money in the equipment acquisition and replacement fund that we'll use to kind of supplement that in this current year. Any questions on IT? Okay. Next up is the custodial and maintenance services. This is on page 128. You can see all of these costs are coming in from the various departments. Most of these ones are that have physical facilities or are housed in a facility. That way we try and spread where the costs are coming from. You can see personnel on this one went down because we had some transfers in from other departments for one of our positions, and we've just allocated that position out. Outside of that, we've increased some of our contract services, again, for some temp services when we need them. We noticed that we were maybe not budgeting enough for those. And then we've also put in this reserve for building maintenance. We've kind of been looking at how we should do this across the city, and we decided maybe having one pot where we could put some money to where if we come up with an issue that needs maintenance, it's available, so we don't have multiple pots in lots of different places. But this just kind of seemed like the best place to put it. Any questions on maintenance and custodial? Like, what's the other word? Okay. Moving on to page 132. So this is the state foot and bike path. This is 1% of the gas tax that we get. It's not a very significant amount, so we didn't really change it a whole lot. We've budgeted it low, just realizing we'll get what we get. And I don't know that we have a specific project that we're thinking about next year. It's likely some sidewalk access ramps, because that's what we've been using that money for in recent years. Engineering development and review. This was one where we used to just transfer money out for the most part for personnel. We brought some personnel back into it. We've increased some of our other fees or our other line items a little bit, but overall it's pretty similar to previous years. Any questions on that? Streets. So this is one where I think for the most part, anybody's guess is as good as anybody's guess on how much gas tax we're going to receive. We know that it's going to go down. The state sent out a projection that it was only going to go down for, I think, 2 months, and then it was going to be back to normal within an amount of time. I think as city managers, we've looked at that and don't really agree, as we've seen a lot of people have a desire to continue to remote work in some fashion. In doing that, I would assume you would see less traveling and less revenue there. This is going to be an area that we have to look into in the future, because right now with what we're projecting, we have enough to do our very basic maintenance of our road system. So if you look at this with our expenses and our personnel, and then our expenses and our normal maintenance, we have nothing budgeted in capital this year. And we're right there on the line of making this work. We're going to keep an eye on it like we will with everything else, and if we have to make changes, we're going to come and do that. But there aren't a lot of options for us on increasing our revenue in streets. So going forward, it might be something that you guys think of, you know, what options do we have? I'm going to tell you, most of those options are not popular.
Absolutely.
You're looking at a gas tax that could be a local gas tax. You're looking at utility fee for road maintenance. Outside of that, I'm not aware of too many other things that I've seen that people do to increase the amount that they can use to fund streets. Any questions on that? Okay, moving along. Links Transit Services. Let's see, this is page 142. You've got the revenues. We've been getting a lot of revenue from the state since they implemented the employee transit tax. And I know we're going to receive upwards of about $95,000 in CARES funding for COVID-19 response and related expenses. So that's going to be nice that we get in those funds. Because we are receiving the state fund, we've increased our service, and you'll see that some of those costs are related here in the personnel services. You can see the current year projection is considerably lower than the budget because we didn't hire some of those positions. But as we see transit come back and ridership return to normal, we will likely be hiring either a supervisor or a additional dispatcher in the links service area. In addition to that, we've got some other incremental increases, and then insurance. We decided to allocate the specific amount of insurance that the buses receive from CIS to the transit fund, since it is a direct cost. In addition to that, you've got a vehicle on the budget, which would be entirely covered by the additional state funding that we'd receive. So, are there any questions on links? Moving on. We've got the Surface Transportation Program, or the STP fund is what we go by usually, page 146. There's not a lot of changes here. I think we've got it budgeted mainly for the street preservation. In addition to that, we're doing an airport road feasibility study out of there as well. Any questions on that? Boat ramp maintenance. This one we are looking to get a FEMA grant for about $100,000. That will help us to rebuild the boat dock that washed away in the flooding. That's really the only difference there in that fund is receiving that and spending that funding. Then we're going to go into capital projects, and I'm going to pass it back over to Ron.
Perfect. So what I guess I'll ask the committee's preference here. There's very little changes in the capital improvement projects funds. I'm more than happy to go through it, each fund with you, or I can give you a real brief overview of the changes. What's the committee's preference?
I'm happy with an overview.
Yeah,
Overview is fine.
Agree.
Okay,
Agreed.
so
Me too.
perfect. Changes this year, I think Matt alluded to the State Highway Signal Maintenance Fund, 815. This is probably the last year that we're going to have that. That was money paid in. That's probably going to go away. There wasn't near as much put into the Equipment Acquisition Fund this year, Fund 820. A lot of the reason for that is we're actually holding those reserve funds in the utility funds, and they were the big contributors to that. So we actually hold that in the utility funds now. No real changes in any of the trust funds that we have, police, library, senior services, or the Snedeker. No street capital maintenance to speak of. I think there's maybe $10,000 or $12,000 in there that we'll use to supplement any small street patch that we have to do, and that's Fund 840. I think Matt alluded to Fund 845, the Infrastructure Deferral Fund. We've combined that with Fund 840 just for ease of tracking. Didn't make sense to have an additional fund. And then the SDCs, we took some snapshots at it and said, well, we think we're going to get this much in this year. The only place that we're really talking any expenditures is probably going to be out of streets a little bit in the streets SDC fund for the airport road and Stoltz Hill traffic signal. That'll go in as part of the Applegate development at that intersection. And also wastewater with the West Side Interceptor. Short of that, there really are no other major SDC planned improvements. Obviously, if things come up throughout the year, because we are still seeing development move forward, we've got it budgeted to use in accordance with the SDC plans. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. That's really brief. Okay.
So, moving on past that, we'll get to the urban renewals, and hold up there, Brett. I think if you guys are okay with it, we will hold off on the urban renewals and do that when we get to item 9 on the agenda. And just do that as a separate presentation. Okay.
We got some stuff to do in between.
Yep. So we'll turn it back over to you, KJ.
Okay, thanks very much, guys. Item number 8 are the public hearings. I'll open a public hearing on the state shared revenues at this time. Since we don't have any public here.
And we did not receive any comment written previous.
Okay, does the committee or members have any questions or anything they'd like to share? Hearing nothing, I would entertain a motion at this time and a second.
Actually, I have something. Actually, I do have a question on the streets. How does that normally get allocated? Because it seems like it's a big, like a infrastructure. How do other cities deal with funding the streets?
Every city in Oregon, every city in the country is faced with the same issue with streets. There's grant programs out there, but there's such specific requirements that we wouldn't necessarily meet it for any maintenance. So any of our overlays or anything like that, there is no mechanism. We get $190,000 a year in surface transportation funds, and that goes about 3 blocks. So, yeah. So it's very minimal, and needs to be something done at a federal level. A lot of cities now have street fees that they've tacked on for additional maintenance, you know, your overlays and stuff like that. Like Matt said, you could do a gas tax, a local gas tax. You know, those are really your only options with streets. The way our funding mechanism in Oregon is set up. So
thanks.
Any other questions out there? Okay, going back to the state shared revenues, I'm looking for a motion. Rebecca.
Oh, fine. I move to recommend the City of Lebanon Budget Committee accept state revenue sharing monies as non-dedicated revenue in the general fund.
Second it.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we will close that public hearing and open a new public hearing on the FY 2020-2021 proposed City of Lebanon budget. Any comments? Did we see anything from the public?
We did not.
Okay, anything from the members? Go ahead, Paul.
Were you ready for the motion? I didn't have anything.
I'm ready for it. I just saw you on mute. I thought maybe you had something, but go right ahead.
I was just ready for the motion as long as no one has anything else. I move to recommend the City of Lebanon Budget Committee levy the permanent property tax rate of 5.1364 per $1,000 of assessed values for operating purposes and 1889062 for payment of bond principal and interest.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, and we would need a motion for accepting the budget in toto.
I move to recommend the City of Lebanon Budget Committee adopt the FY 2020-21 budget in the sum of $63,307,859 as proposed by the city budget officer.
Second.
And it's moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, thank you. We'll now adjourn as the City Budget Committee and convene as the Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee. We've got the FY 2021 Lebanon Urban Renewal Agency budget presentation. You get it now, Ron.
Okay. If you go back to page C in the original document under our budget message, we have the Lebanon Urban Renewal Agency under that, and I'm going to read that in for the record as the opening to this. The Lebanon Urban Renewal Agency has 4 urban renewal districts: the Northwest URD, Cheetah Lake URD, the North Gateway URD, and the Downtown URD. The total overall agency budget has increased by $68,319 from fiscal year 19-20. Contingencies increased by $979,368, while the debt service line item decreased by $504,244. Transfers out also decreased by $332,464. As always, the budget has been prepared with the city's goals in view, including the council's goals adopted on the February 22nd, 2017, the Community Strategic Action Plan, and the council's fiscal goals and policies. Specifically, the following goals have been addressed either in whole or by part by the budget document. I won't read into the document what's been done as part of those goals, but you can see them there down below that. And with that, I will turn the rest of it over to Matt.
Okay. So, additionally, for those that have been on the budget committee before, I worked with the Secretary of State to determine that
We're getting a feedback loop somewhere, so those people on the call, please mute until you're ready to speak, please.
All right.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. So I worked with the Secretary of State to work on combining all of our urban renewal districts into one entity. I think they were, based on what I could tell and what I talked with Trey, is they were all set up under the Lebanon Urban Renewal Agency, and they were plans within that agency. So we had previously been doing separate audits for these, and because of that last year, I said we need to do separate budgets for each one of these. And digging into it a little bit further, we determined we could do one budget for all of the urban renewal districts because they are part of the Urban Renewal Agency. And so we have an agency budget, and going forward, we'll have one budget for the city, one budget for the agency, and one audit for the city and one audit for the agency. So this is a little bit different than what we've seen in the past, but hopefully it will save some confusion and some time.
That is like so much better for this process. I'm going to say thank you.
Anytime. So I know Ron read a little bit from the other budget message. I forgot to give him this one. So I'm just going to kind of point out a few things. Overall, our contingencies are up by 48.1% in the urban renewal agencies. That's $979,368. A majority of this is because the city has transferred in the money to repay those projects. That money is going to sit there and be there for debt service payments out of the Northwest Urban Renewal District. Other than that, the major other change is the underfunding of the Northwest Urban Renewal District. We're able to do this because we're transferring that money, and for subsequent years, the city will be transferring money to kind of offset the costs that we should have paid from other sources. So kind of skip through that and then get right into the budget document. So Northwest Urban Renewal District, as I said, we're underfunding the revenue on page 3. And we're going down from 1.6 million is what we budgeted this year. We've received a little bit, we expect to receive a little bit more than that, to about 950,000. We'll have the transfers in, and we had a beginning balance of about 1.9 million. We don't have any expenses coming out of this district besides debt service, and we have a reserve for debt service. So going forward, that's what we will see out of this district. Cheetah Lake Urban Renewal District. So property taxes, we've kind of put in as the same. These will fluctuate. They could come down a little. We'll see as we get there. We've got contract services. In this budget, you will not see transfers out to the city. Talking with the Department of Revenue, they said those need to be classified not as a transfer out, but as another payment. So those got moved in these budgets to contract services because the city is doing the work for the districts. They are going to send us the money to kind of reimburse us for the labor and benefits of those staff. We've got improvements in here for the Cheetah Lake. There's the possibility of putting in a play structure at Porter Park. Outside of that, we've got operating contingency and debt service payments. Any questions on that one? Seeing none, the Northwest Urban, or the North Gateway Urban Renewal District. Didn't put any increase in property taxes from what we received this year. And then contract services. I'm trying to remember it, drawn a blank. Oh, this is because we are transferring money to the city because we have agreed to pay SDC charges for the Samaritan development. Those have been outstanding for a number of years, and this should be the last year. So of this amount, 313,000 is repaying the SDCs, and the remainder is kind of the contract for the city to operate the district. We've got a little bit in here for improvements if needed, and then we've got a reserve for future expenditure, and that's mainly for a traffic signal that'll go out on Highway 20 when we get there. Any questions on the North Gateway Urban Renewal District? We'll move into the Downtown Urban Renewal District. This district is not going to have a lot of activity, same as last year. We've put all of it in contract services. I don't believe that we plan to spend any of it, but if we need to, it's there to spend. We're budgeting the $3,250 if needed. And that is the urban renewal districts, and there's the detail beyond that. Are there any questions? Now we'll turn it back to KJ.
Okay, thanks. Not hearing any questions, then we're going to go through a series of opening and closings here. And first off is the Northwest Lebanon URD. I'm going to open up the public hearing for that URD. Did we hear anything from the public?
We did not.
Okay, any questions from the committee?
No.
Not hearing any, I would entertain a motion on the Northwest Lebanon URD.
I move to recommend the Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee approve the Northwest Lebanon URD taxes for fiscal year 2020-21 at the tax increment value of $60 million.
Second. I've got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? And it passes. And I will close the public hearing on the Northwest Lebanon URD and open for the Cheetah Lake URD. Did we have any public input on this one?
No.
None. I would entertain a motion.
I move to recommend the Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee approve the Cheetah Lake URD taxes for fiscal year 2020-2021 at the rate of 100% of the amount from the Division of Tax.
Second it.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, I will close that public hearing and open on the North Gateway URD. Anything from the public?
No.
I would entertain a motion.
I move to recommend the Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee approve the North Gateway URD taxes for fiscal year 2020, 2021 at the rate of 100% of the amount from the Division of Tax.
Anybody want to second that?
Second.
Second, thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. And we're going to close that public hearing and open a public hearing on the downtown URD. Again, anything from the public?
No.
What a shock. I would entertain a motion on the downtown URD.
I move to recommend the Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee approve the downtown URD taxes for fiscal year 2020, 2021 at the rate of 100% of the amount from the Division of Tax.
Second. Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. And we would entertain a motion for the proposed urban renewal budget. Jason. Just want to make sure you're awake, dude.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you.
I move to recommend the Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee adopt the fiscal year 2021 Lebanon Rural Renewal Agency budget in the sum of $5,886,185 as proposed by the agency's budget officer.
Second. Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, I will now adjourn us as the Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee and reconvene as the City of Lebanon Budget Committee. And I would accept at this point any committee comments.
Where's my sandwich? We usually get one.
I know, I had to go to Subway.
Subway.
You know how much
Yeah.
that is?
Yeah, KJ, I just want to say a couple things. First of all, thank you to all the volunteers, the citizens that are on our panel this year. I appreciate your service. This is an awkward way to do it. It's a little wonky and funky, but we got through it, and I appreciate the staff and all they're putting together the budget. And also, lastly, KJ, this is his last meeting, and he's done a great service. I don't know how many years you've been doing it, KJ.
8.
8 years on the budget committee. We really appreciate your service, and this will be his last meeting. So thank you for chairing today and running things good. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. Any other comments? Wow. Bob.
I'd just like to thank Andy and what's his name?
Brent.
To help me with setting up this computer. Brent. Yeah, I know I was born too soon, so I'm not up on the computer stuff, but boy, they really came forward and helped me out, and I really appreciate it.
Good job, Bob. I understand, Bob. I've never been this old before. Okay.
Bob Wells here. I just wanted to thank Matt in particular for the preparation for the meeting. I think the reason the meeting went so smooth is that we had at least had the opportunity to be well prepared with the documents that we received in advance. So thank you for that.
Yep. And I would like to add that I agree with Rebecca for a change. This new format, of the way it's presented, I like it a lot. It's a lot smoother and cleaner. And Rebecca, I beat my own time on this length of this meeting just for you.
I'm super proud, super proud. We're going to miss you, KJ.
Oh, no, you won't. I'll come walk by your house and yell at you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Hearing none, I hereby adjourn the Budget Committee meeting for the City of Lebanon.